Hello again. Welcome to Multiblind Podcast Episode 3. Bit of a delayed Happy New Year to everybody. I wasn't that quick on getting around to sorting this episode out, but this competition took place in early January. I think maybe the 3rd or 4th, something like that, right after New Year, happening in Dublin. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on, what my kind of training strategies were, what I'm thinking for this year, more what I'm thinking for this year than what my training strategies actually were, because I didn't do very much training over Christmas. But I'll kind of talk about my whole yearly plan. In terms of what to expect, I still don't know. I still don't know why I'm doing these. Is it self-indulgent narcissism? Maybe. Is it just I've got video footage and I feel like I should use it somehow to post? Maybe that too. Mostly I am aiming to provide something that's at least a little bit helpful when it comes to training, when it comes to the physical side of things. So I've started this YouTube channel specifically to provide physical advice. So stuff that you can do based around improving your physical body, your mental health, your hands. Is it turning your hands faster? How you breathe, how you see things, how you absorb information quicker, rather than looking at algorithms and all of that other stuff. So that's the goal. This is an hour long. There's going to be tangents. There's going to be whatever. We'll just see how we go. Still kind of enjoying doing them, but we'll just have to see what the most useful thing people can get out of it. I'm not even sure where to start. There's been so many changes to my life, my training, everything, that this whole year is just going to be quite different for me in terms of cubing. So, number one, I have moved homes. Previously, I've been living in London for the last 14 years and decided with my partner that we were going to try out going somewhere else. So specifically, we decided we were going to move to Belfast in Ireland to see kind of what life is like there. 14 years is a long time for London. You get very institutionalized. It's such a weird place if you haven't been. If you just imagine, take any two words and then put them into Google and then put the word London after it, and whatever two words, somebody in London is doing something related to those things, you will always find a Google search. Feel free to try me on that. Let me know what comes up. It's totally bizarre. London has anything and everything you could ever want, and yet it has this ability to make you just feel like you can't afford to leave your house to go and do any of it. It's almost like paying for a really expensive Netflix subscription and you just don't use it. So that is kind of where I'm leaving London at. I pretty much got to a point where it's like, this isn't financially sustainable. It's not particularly enjoyable. And generally, it's quite hard to feel massively safe in somewhere like that, which is bizarre coming from a country that had a civil war going on when I was born. But yeah, that's kind of how it is. So we've packed everything up, moved over to Belfast, and we're gonna try things out from there. And what that's going to mean for my cubing and competitions, I don't know. I kind of thought, hey, maybe I'm going to be going to a lot more Irish competitions, but I've actually started looking around to see where I can end up going overseas a bit more, just now that I can actually afford to for a little while. I'm going to be spending a lot more time on the more important aspects of my business, which is, I think I've mentioned both previous times, but I'm a movement coach focusing on the brain and nervous system and their impact on movement. So I work with a lot of athletes, I work with a lot of people with injuries and things like that in order to improve the way they move, improve the way they learn things, help them when they get stuck with plateaus when it comes to like skill acquisition or mindset when it comes to winning competitions and stuff. And that's one of the reasons why I really want to make something for speed cubing, because any of the tutorials I kind of find on the internet, most of the time it's based around these are the alg sets you need to learn, this is the specific technique, and everything's described in terms of like a learnable concept. So stuff like look ahead, it's thinking about it from the realm of the technique. What I'm more interested is, well, how does look ahead work if your eyes aren't actually capable of moving quickly enough? How do you find where to look if your peripheral vision isn't very good? How does things like your balance or your breathing affect how much energy is distributed through your brain and body, and how does that then affect your focus? So maybe we'll get to some of that today. Definitely check out my shorter videos. That's where I'm trying to specifically help other people. Here it's just a bit of rambling and seeing what comes out. So, I guess let's start with one of the big changes that you might notice for this attempt. Is it's a much larger attempt than the other two times. This is 30, and this was a decision that I started making pretty much after the last Portugal comp. That was the last podcast episode I had. I have since gone to more competitions in a 2-month period than probably any other 2-month, maybe even 6-month period ever. I had competitions, I think, in Manchester, Cambridge, Poland, Coventry, and yeah, had a pretty good time. But I decided that eventually I'm going to want to be progressing on from 18 cubes. And one of the things that I noticed when I jumped from 14 to 18, even though I was already practicing it at home, it was really difficult to get into the zone for like getting my splits and getting my times right for competition. So once I got my 13 out of 14, decided, all right, I'm not going to keep going to 14, but I'm going to bump it up to 18. Tried the first couple of competitions and everything just dropped right down. And actually, it took almost a year before 18 started to feel comfortable again. And that's kind of annoying, because especially now that I feel like I'm making some good progress, I don't like the idea that I'm going to have to just jump back to the start. So one of my big goals for this year, and I started with it last year, is to try wherever possible to attend comps where there is more than one multi-blind attempt. And then what that lets me do is the same with a regular blind solve. For the average, usually people talk about having a safety and then just going for broke for the next two solves. So, your safety, you do it nice and slow, you make sure everything is as good as it can be. And then the next two solves, you're just going to blitz it, you're going to rush the memo, you're going to execute as fast as you possibly can, just in the hope that you get a better time to win the comp. I'm kind of going for a similar approach now with multi-blind, and the idea is to gradually increase the cubes each attempt. So the first attempt is the safety. That's the number that I'm comfortable going with. I think 18 is a good number for me, so that's probably where I will stick. Then when it gets to attempt 2, then I'll bump up the numbers a little bit depending on how well the first one went. That could be, up quite a lot to maybe 24, or just up a little bit. And then when we get to attempt 3, then that's going to be the maximum I feel comfortable with, which for now is looking like 30. So that way, by the time I get to attempt 3, it's very unlikely my brain is going to be mentally prepared to improve on the first 2 attempts. But what that does mean is then I get a slightly higher stressful environment to practice something that eventually I'm going to want to be familiar and easy to me. So even though it could be a year, maybe it could be 2 years before I feel actually ready to be actually competing with 30 cubes, I want to have the ability to go in, do the 30, and not feel all this stress and overwhelm on top of like the difficulty of actually doing the solve. I want to be able to go in feeling like 30 is the same as I do it at home, which is a bit more what 18 feels like right now. So that's the first bit. The first attempt of this comp was 18 cubes. I can't quite remember what I got. I think I got 14 out of 18. And this attempt, I'm not sure I even got 2. I think it might have been 1 out of 30 by the end of it. But again, I don't mind so much. There was quite a few cubes where I got either the edges or the corners. And when I do this in practice, I actually make a big deal out of that. So I don't practice and finish and look at how many cubes I got solved, because most of the time that's going to be 0. And if I'm just seeing every day 0 out of 30, 0 out of 30, 0 out of 30, how do I know that I'm getting any better? So what I'll do at home is I'll actually make an effort after each attempt to count how many individual pieces are in their correct place. So I've got like a little tap counter, and I'll go through and pick 1 cube at a time, count each cube that's already solved in its place, and then at the end I get a total score which fluctuates quite wildly, even though my actual score is not changing by a huge amount. And this, I feel like, is doing me really, really well. Feel free to argue for or against this in the comments, but as an approach, I really like this one. I am finding steadily things do seem to be improving. I'm finding when I have a bad day, I can usually explain it by, was it my sleep? Was it what I ate? Was I just having an argument with somebody and I'm just pissed off? Usually when I have a bad attempt, I can figure out what's going wrong, and there's only been a couple of times where I'm like, oh, this wasn't as good, my memory wasn't as good, let's figure out what's going on there. And I couldn't come up with any answers. And I also find it's helping make my memory a little bit more consistent, because one of the proven strategies for memory is when you get something that feels like it's on the tip of your tongue, so you have this thought like, I know it, I just can't say exactly what it is. There seems to be a lot of research saying if you just stay on that and just hold it for as long as you can, and eventually it comes into your mind, that will strengthen your memory overall quite significantly. And what I find when you do it this kind of way in a multi-blind is you can get something on the tip of your tongue and you can spend a little bit of time on it, but then you've got to jump to the next one. Then you got to jump to you don't want to spend your whole 15 minute of solving time just on one cube. So you'll jump to the next one, you'll jump to the next one, then something familiar will come up and you'll hop back, and even if you can only remember two pieces, you'll execute those two pieces. But that act of having the thing come back into your mind and acting on it does a little mini version of that whole tip of the tongue, force yourself to remember thing. So as you're going through, you can have 5 of those happening at one time. And what you'll see at the end of this solve is that's kind of how I'm reacting. My hands are sort of, I think, picking up each cube going, nope, 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 nope. This one I remember. Okay, cool. Nope, nope, nope. And then suddenly I remember one from earlier, whether it's just the corners, just the edges, something like that, maybe even just a couple pieces. And then I'm solving those few pieces, then going around the next ones. It's not going to be a good technique to actually get a decent result long term, but I really do feel like this is helping with memo for my regular blind attempts, and even for my smaller multi attempts. I'm finding it's very rare these days that I get to a cube and I don't know what the memo is. Now, whether I've traced it wrong or whether I've executed it badly, those two things seem to need work, especially tracing. I've discovered I have some problems with edge flips and things like that. So that needs a lot of work. And execution wise, I still need to maybe make some algorithms a little bit more efficient. So some of my 3-style algs are just insane setup moves to an easier alg that I know. And if I could just learn a slightly less convoluted setup move, I'm sure my execution would drop down. But that's something that I'm taking pretty slowly. It's going step by step. At the minute, I'm finding the algs for NQ, PQ, and then the other way around, QN, QP. These are the two that I kind of worked out for this comp, and then when I got to the comp and I tried to execute them, didn't necessarily have so much practice down by the 3rd of January, so that didn't go particularly well, but I'm more confident for the next one. And that's probably the other thing about this competition. I really like the Irish speed cubing community, and the competition organizers. Everybody's nice and friendly, and the competitions are always, I feel, really well organized and really well run. But I'm not sure I would commit to a competition again on the 3rd of January, or whatever day it was. It was the first weekend in January. My kind of whole year, I always work it out. The first 3 months, the weather's usually pretty rubbish, so I use that for as much difficult work as I can fit in, and so that's my little time of the year to sacrifice all the fun stuff to get the work done. And so that means less social outings, less fancy frivolous spending. I don't drink alcohol the first 3 months of the year. I get quite militant, so anything I choose is a New Year's resolution. I'll get really militant with that sort of stuff. Then I'll have, it kind of tapers off a little bit. I just kind of let the discipline slide as we get closer to the summer. Luckily with the national championships, so the Irish championships the last few years have been in the summer, so that kind of gets me back on track for a little bit, where I kind of focus on that. But then usually you have that summer holiday period. Business is usually not necessarily booming by then, so I've got a bit of a break. And then I have a small little pickup again, so once the final kind of term starts, September, I find with my line of work, I usually get a lot more clients because once everybody's kids have gone back to school and university and all of that, the older ones or the athletes and all of that suddenly get really hyper focused into like, okay, I need to start working harder. Just means more work for me, and so I get a bit of harder work. By the time I get to December, though, it's all bets are off. I use that kind of like 3 months of disciplined work. It's very hard to get into that. So what I say is just December, no rules whatsoever. You know, you can eat as much as you like, drink as much as you like, do whatever you want. If you don't feel like working today, as long as you got no clients, you don't have to do all the video editing and session planning and course creation. All of that just goes out the window. You just do what you feel like, have fun, try to have too much fun, and I really mean that. Like, by the time I get to Christmas week, obviously Christmas, everybody says they eat too much, they drink too much, they party too hard, whatever. As soon as I hit like day 2, so once we're on Boxing Day, I'm usually done with fun. I'm at the point where I'm just like, okay, this all needs to stop now. I've just spent the whole month doing nothing, being lazy. I just really want to get back to work. And then I tell myself, nope, you're not allowed to. It's not New Year yet. So I spend another 6 days where all I can think about is how much I don't want to be having any more fun, social, any of that. And by the time I get to January 1st, then it's actually a lot easier to be really disciplined with myself because I've just spent a whole week hating it the other way round. But unfortunately, that's a good time to start training. It's definitely not a good time to start a competition. I got to the start of this competition, the first attempt, I was just executing the 3 style algs pretty fast, like really confidently, and then finishing and being like, I don't know what the hell I just did. I don't know whether I did the right alg for that letter pair. I don't know if I even did a 3 style alg or if I just did like a PLL case or something. I was just firing out random stuff, and I was very surprised that I even got the amount of correctly solved cubes that I did, because it felt like I was just winging everything. Like, yeah, I don't know. That was pretty wild. As well as that, this year, because I moved house in end of October. So October, we packed up all our things, sent them over to Belfast, and then we decided to tour around Poland. So I brought all of my 30 multi-cubes to Poland, competed in the Polish championships for 3 days, 2 days, can't remember, but that was right at the very start, and then I just had to carry these cubes around for the whole month. But because I had so much stuff with me, I really didn't want to unpack the cubes, because I had packed everything in like so neatly and tightly so that it would be easy to go on this multi-city tour of Poland. So I did zero practice with cubes for at least 2 months. And I would say even October I didn't do much practice because I was so stressed with selling everything I own in London and moving it over. So this is almost a 3-month break before this competition. And yeah, I guess I would say compared to the last episode where I was putting everything in specific packets, and I was thinking about nutrition and stuff, for this competition I thought of nothing, and it was just a competition that wasn't that far away. So I decided, yeah, go have fun, get to compete, get to see familiar people. That was really the entire goal there. There was nothing outside of just wanting it to be a fun experience, and pretty much that's how it felt. The one exception to that being that I've been working on edge flips a lot. So when you're doing weak swap in Multiblind, where you assume you memorize edges first and you just assume you're going to have parity until you don't have parity, until you find out you don't. There's a lot of cases where if you only have one other flipped edge, then sometimes you think that you're flipped, that you need to do the regular edge flipping algorithm, but sometimes the flipped edge is in the flipped space, so in like the parity space. And when you do the edge flipping algorithm, by the time you finish, you still end up with two flipped edges. And so I've been spending a long time trying to work that out. For some reason, I just don't understand it. So if anyone can explain how to figure out when you need to do that, I would appreciate that, because right now I'm just guessing and it's working most of the time, but I'm still having cases where those two, the buffer and the parity swap piece, usually UR, is flipped by the end, and not gonna lie, it's really annoying me. So yeah, any tips or help on that would be really appreciated. The other thing that I'm noticing with 30 cubes is the shorter the amount of time you have to give yourself to memo, I feel like the harder it is to predict when you're doing that correctly. So when I have 20 seconds, 25 seconds per cube to have a look at it, when I've looked back on solves, it seems like I'm usually hitting that 25 seconds or less. When it's only 15 seconds, and maybe this will change as I get my actual memo times down, but with 15 seconds, it always feels like the whole time I feel like I'm rushing really, really fast, but the amount of time I spend on each cube varies quite wildly. So that is another area where I'm kind of feeling a little stuck and struggling a little bit. But yeah, any tips, please let me know. I would be really curious as to how I can sort that out. After that, the big things for 30 cubes mostly feels like it's just stress management type stuff. So I feel like I don't always practice visualizing all my rooms as often as I maybe should. And so once I've kind of I've almost doubled the amount of rooms that I'm memorizing things in, it feels like a lot of the time when I get into that second row, I can quite easily swap a room in the second row in that like second packet of 12 with a room in the first, and I think that's just a stress thing. I've got a little breathing technique I like to do before competitions, but lately, whatever way the competition's set up, I haven't found the right time and space to be able to do that. Maybe that's going to help. The other thing that I've noticed with larger attempts, obviously, the more cubes you're attempting, you probably aren't going to attempt them unless your solve time is quite a bit lower. And that means you're going to have a larger chunk of time set aside for memorization and a shorter period of time set aside for solving, which I guess is the way it's supposed to be. But one of the other problems then is almost everybody else starts before you, and so you start to see people like getting the harmonica holders ready. You see people picking up their first cubes, actually start to solve. You start hearing the sounds of solving, and then one of the other things that I need to work out of how to kind of deal with is, how do I get that feeling out of my head like I'm not actually in a rush. I'm on a different timeline to everybody else. I haven't quite worked that out either. I still think that as soon as everybody else starts, that I'm in a rush, that I need to get started, or I won't be able to finish them. And really, when it comes to 30 cubes, it's not true, because I think the best result I've had so far is 5 out of 30. I don't really need to start until 55 minutes, and I could beat that score. So I guess I want it to mimic the actual times I need realistically, but it's still pretty hard to get right. I'm noticing physically from this solve that the table seems to just keep shaking itself. I guess I've got like a jittery leg under there. That is most likely just the result of that process I told you about. So too much alcohol, too much good times, too much food, not enough sleep, not enough good quality sleep, and this stage in the year is just still kind of working out of my system. So that's something you can see in people very physically. I mentioned in the last video, if you're watching this far into it, send me a message with the word Dublin in it. You can send me an average of 5. I can do an analysis on like your posture, your eyes, your just physical orientation on when you solve, and recommend if there's specific types of training or types of exercises that you could do to help mitigate those. For me, this kind of like leg bouncing thing, there's a number of different things that can make it show up. Sleep will be a huge one. Anxiety, obviously, it's really closely associated with. But one of the interesting things is your anxiety levels and your propensity to feel anxiety often is really linked closely with how stimulated your balance systems are. So when the vestibular system, which is like a little canals in your inner ear, kind of look like a little, well, not look like, they kind of act like a little spirit level inside your brain that helps tell you which way up you are. And what they find is when those systems get either like hyper aroused or maybe if they are just not functioning in an optimal way, one of the big emotions that tends to be associated with that is anxiety. And that kind of makes sense because the vestibular system, we say it's the system that balances you. It's like the balance system of the body, but balance is essentially just a really precise form of movement. And so the vestibular system is all about managing movement. When the vestibular system is not functioning really well, then you're going to find that your brain gives you anxiety, because anxiety is the emotion that basically tells you you should be moving, you should be doing something, and that is going to prompt you to start moving around, whether it's moving your head or moving your body, just to get a little bit more information into the vestibular system so that your brain feels more confident about your body's ability to move and therefore calm you down. So some of this is just like general anxiety from the fact that I'm trying a bigger attempt. I generally a bit nervous because I haven't practiced for a long time, but I think a lot of the rest of it is just going to be from the lack of sleep. There's a lot of like nail biting and stuff. There's a lot of shifting in my body. That's also another kind of key balance cue. And I'm also noticing, compared to previous attempts, there's a whole lot more movement of my hands, my head. Most of these things in blind solving especially, you shouldn't need to have huge, big movements in order to see the right spot on the cube. Like, it's a very tiny adjustment that lets you turn the cube to see the back, to turn it to see the front, and both sides. And if you're moving your head at the same time, those movements get smaller still. So when I look at somebody and moving around so much like this, again, that signals a little bit of an anxious response, a little bit of like a hyper aroused, like stressful response, because your brain's overdoing all the movements. Another part of the brain called the cerebellum is supposed to slow those things down. So when the more stress that you get, the less the brain has the ability to put the brakes on your movement, and so you start to find all of your movements get a little bit more big, a little bit more exaggerated, and it's usually when you find also in cubing that you get like more of the lockups, because your brain isn't able to slow things down as fast as it would like, so it either puts the brakes on so hard that it stops it too early, or it forgets and it stops it too late. And that's my theory anyway. So I would imagine by the next competition, I would want to see all of this greatly reduce. One of the big ways that you can reduce stress levels in the body is through adequate sleep. And as a kind of New Year's resolution, I guess, for cubing specifically, I've decided sleep is my goal to focus on. So I usually like to pick one or two things every year that's just like a general theme of something I'm going to spend that year paying attention to. Last year was food and nutrition. I found that one of the nice things about food and nutrition is you can learn a lot by doing just a small amount. The more you try to analyze it and the more you try to go into great detail about it, the less efficient the work actually becomes. So like last year in January, I had a food diary where I took every single ingredient of everything that I ate and logged it in like a little calendar thing that made statistical graphs that would match up to symptoms I reported. So as well as logging all the food, I would log energy levels and all sorts of stuff. So like what time I woke up, my ability to focus, what my cube times were like, whether they were good, bad, bowel movements, all sorts of things just logged in like this statistical diary. And the idea was the program would come up with a way to link the things that seem to be commonly associated. And what I found with that was basically gave me no useful information at all, other than food we normally consider to be bad seems to be a little bit worse than food we normally consider to be good. And it was like splitting hairs as well. So like even all the fast food and stuff, like stuff that when I eat it I feel physically worse, wasn't showing up super conclusively in this graph as like this is actually changing your solve times or anything like that. And so I found that pretty interesting. And then I cut down the amount of work I was doing. So I would just choose like 1 week to say, all right, I'm just going to try and only eat this kind of food over and over constantly, and then feel in my kind of brain, in my body, what eating too much of that type of food felt like, so that next time if I start to feel like brain fog or something, I have a better idea of like what feelings that's associated with. Don't know if that makes sense, but let's take, if you want to separate different types of junk food, so let's take some crisps, and you have a certain brand of crisp that you like. It's like, okay, rather than eat it and wait to see on a graph later, just take it and buy it every single day, and usually by the end of that week, you've oversaturated your body with what's in it, and you feel pretty horrible. and you get like a strong feeling of how you feel horrible. So if you start to eat other foods that have those same ingredients, your brain remembers the time you had those too much crisps, and it goes, ah man, this feels exactly like that time. You shouldn't eat this. It's not good for you. And that was kind of the approach I took for most of the year. The other way you can do it is to cut something out for about 30 days and then reintroduce it. And if it was having any kind of negative effect that your body just sort of learned to tolerate or get used to, then you would find that when you go back to it, the side effects are way worse. So, like, alcohol's an obvious one with that. A lot of people do dry January. For me, I do 3 months of the year, and then first time I have a beer, it doesn't feel great. Like, it's very obvious that as a substance, it's really not doing me any good. And the longer I go through with that little experiment, the more obvious it seems to become. So whether I continue to drink alcohol at all remains to be seen. My consumption's definitely gone drastically down over the years. Another one I was curious about this year was gluten. So just based on the idea that, foods that contain gluten, like rice and pasta and stuff like that, can really elevate your blood sugar levels really, really high. That's not necessarily going to be great for your continued performance ability over time. So I tried to cut out gluten for 30 days, and then at the end of the 30 days, you just have to have a really big dose and see what it does. And interestingly, I found that while I did notice a slight difference during the 30 days, in terms of, I think I could focus for longer. So not even focus better, but I could maintain my focus without getting tired for a little bit longer throughout the day. And I tested it out in a competition in Sweden. We had 6 attempts of multi in a day, and my finding was kind of consistent with that. By the end of the 6 attempts, I felt if they said, hey, we messed that one up, can we do another one? I would have been like, yeah, no problem, I'll do another multi. Before, I would never have been able to do more than 2 attempts in a day without severe brain fog. So that was positive. When I then went to reintroduce the gluten, I would say I felt it on the day, as in, like, I could feel like as if stuff was building up in my throat, and like a bit of like a brain foggy kind of tired feeling. But I was sort of expecting like a much bigger residual, and the next day just felt totally fine, like nothing had happened. So again, was interesting to try, interesting to notice. If you do want to take that approach, that's kind of the way that I would recommend it. So stuff you already know isn't great, load up on it for a week or so, and usually your body will hate it by the end, and you will have some really strong reactions to the specific things it has a problem to. And the other side is just go without for 30 days, spend 30 days abstaining from that thing completely, and then when you reintroduce it, especially if you have like a actual allergy or something to it, the side effects will be super strong, so it will be harder to ignore. And if the side effects really aren't that bad after that long absence, then you can be reasonably assured that that's something that probably isn't going to mess you up all that much. So that was 2024, and like I said, 2025, I've decided sleep is going to be in the target. I've kind of slept, really, if there was one thing I would say that just hasn't been the best for the last decade or so for me, it's been sleep. And one of the reasons I haven't strive to do anything about it is I've kind of run out of ideas on how. So, people have the obvious things of, make sure it's dark at night, make sure you got the right mattress, make sure you've got reduce the light sources after 9 p.m. or whatever. There are like some dietary things that can help. I've kind of tried bits of everything and never found that any of them seem to make a big difference for me. And that's one of the big things that's important for me, is it's not just taking people's advice blindly. It's always about testing things and see what's helping. Now that I'm out of London, though, and I've got a little bit more control over my schedule, then my next goal is to actually enforce some of these standard things and see what they do. So, no screen times, no light sources after 9 p.m. is going to be a big one. Making sure that I get a minimum of 8 hours every night. So last year, I was getting myself up at 5 a.m. every day just because for a while I felt like building stronger habits has been the important part in my life. If you're getting up at 5 a.m., it's really hard for you to do stuff that's bad for your health late in the evening, which is usually when all that stuff comes out. Nobody wants to go drinking, nobody wants to go for like a late night meal in the afternoon. So once you shorten your bedtime, you push that to earlier, then it becomes a lot easier to make better choices. And because I shifted my cube training to 5 a.m. as well, it kind of meant like waking up at 5 was integral to me having a good day, because if I don't get up that early, I don't get to do the thing I like. And I found that to be incredibly useful. However, just because you say you've got an earlier bedtime so that you can wake up at 5, a lot of the time it's quite easy to be like, well, yeah, but I just need to get this done, I need to get this done. So now I'm removing the 5 a.m. element, and it's going to be a requirement for me to get the right amount of sleep. We'll start with 8 hours and we'll see, does it need to be more, does it need to be less? And then month by month, we can just start playing with all the other variables. So like, when do you have your first meal? When do you have your last meal? What other kind of stress management things are you dealing with? You could get hyper specific. So, do you sleep better on one side versus the other side? And can we prove this with how it affects your cube times and memory times and things like that? All of those kinds of things will come up, and probably, if I'm still doing these podcasts, which I imagine I will be, then we will see what kinds of things have been useful. So it won't just be the cube practice, there'll be the physical things I get to report as well. All right, we're into the solving now. I think we're well into the solving. As I said, this one's going to be a little scattered and random. I'm literally going to be feeling my way through these cubes. Anytime it feels like I've got a hit, there's something I can remember, I'm just going to go and try and solve it. Anytime I cannot, I just skip it, move to the next one. And as I said, I'm not necessarily going for huge successes with these 30. I'm going for teaching myself how to get my splits right. So how to make sure I've got through each packet at the right amount of time so that I've still got enough time to do the rest, do all my reviews, and end up with 20 minutes or so to solve. And then when it gets to the solving stage, I kind of just don't care. I kind of just think, get my memory working. Anything I can remember is a positive, even if it's not the first letter pair in the sequence. If I can remember the last 3, I'm going to execute the last 3. And what I want to see over time is just more of the whole picture solved rather than getting more cubes. And I think this is going to be the way forward to actually solving more. By the time I've got, my PRs up, I maybe get 18, 21, 24. Once I'm ready for 30, I want it to feel like I'm ready for 30. I want it to actually be pretty easy to get through in the right amount of time, and then all it is just a matter of getting the memo right. I think that's a solid strategy. I don't know who agrees. There's not so many people doing 30. I don't know, is it now top 100 or maybe 200 in the world, or 30 plus points? Very unlikely one of those is going to be watching, but if you are, let me know. How did you manage it? I don't get to speak to very many people about like how they went from one to the other. I've seen a lot of people just bump their numbers right up and only do those like high levels in competitions, and that seems to work really well for people. I know that I require a little bit more dopamine, and I need to see physical results in order to stay motivated to keep trying in a certain way. So that's another reason why I'm going for this way. But yeah, what do you think? Could that strategy with the solving just whichever pieces comes to mind work, or does that make things worse? It doesn't seem to from what I've looked at with memory. And as you can see, I'm even finding like I'm jumping forwards and backwards in this. So, and once I solve one, there's usually always another one of the letter pairs from that cube is usually always in another cube. So once I solve one of them, it usually brings up maybe one or two other cubes where I'm like, oh, cool, I remember that was in it. Now, because of that, I remember maybe 5 more things. So it's kind of this weird scattered web solving method, but it seems to be okay. It even looks like I did more than one, so that's cool. I think that's it, though. I think I did maybe 3 then. My best was at the Polish Championship. I think I got 5 out of 30. And that felt pretty good, especially because I found the Polish Championship very difficult. Polish is a language I've tried to learn a few times, but yeah, man, it's harder to learn a language that uses your own alphabet just however it likes. Like Irish is another example. You've got the same letters, but they're not used the same way in Irish. Polish is a bit like that. I found the Russian Cyrillic alphabet so much easier to learn than Polish, just because at least you're not looking at anything that resembles itself. And so, yeah, when I was at the Polish Championship, all the announcements only in Polish. Didn't understand a thing that was going on. Obviously not their fault. That was my fault deciding I could get there. But yeah, I was just wandering around, totally confused the entire time. And people were helpful, but yeah, just surprised I actually got a decent result, or like my best result out of 30 in those conditions, because I was feeling stressed. I even came in with my jacket on, took it off, left it on a chair, and then had some guy just kind of telling me how I couldn't have the jacket in the room. And all he could say to me in English was just special rule for jackets. And somebody else at the table was trying to translate for me. And while I'm looking around, everybody else just has their jackets on the chair. And yeah, don't know why I'm venting about that now. I guess it's the usual. Once I get to these solves, start to run out of things to say. So yeah, I don't know. That's what you need to know, Poland. Apparently there's a special rule for jackets. And it applies to me. All right. When are we getting to the end here? I don't even think I tried to do this solve all the way to the end. But either way, we've got like 3 or 4 cubes left, and then I'm probably just going to have a little wave over to see what went well, what didn't. But that was it. Yeah, not too bad on the first attempt. Not great, but not terrible on the second attempt. I'm going to try to get a bit more practice in now, get back into the daily routine of it, and yeah, just try and bump up the results for the next one, which will be in Italy, actually. So another foreign one, which I'm quite excited about. How often do other people practice? I'm curious if anyone's still here. There's no way you're still here and you don't do multi. I'm even surprised if you do. How often do you practice? Do you do at least an attempt every day? Is there anyone doing like Timon Koleshinsky levels of practice but for multi? I don't know. I kind of feel like I do a lot of practice. Partially because it takes up half of my day, partially because I work with a lot of professional athletes and it kind of matches or exceeds some of their practice, but then at the same time, they do a lot of physical stuff. My stuff really isn't physical. I've worked with like chess players and video gamers who just do it insane hours every single day. So yeah, maybe I don't actually practice that much. Be curious to hear, and I'd also be curious to hear how healthy people think the amount of practice that they do is. So, like I said, when I was waking up at 5 and kind of making sure I trained 5 through till 11, I didn't necessarily think that was a healthy amount to do. I just felt like it was better to build the habit of always training, and then I could make more sensible choices with it. But yeah, let me know what you think. All right, I've stopped, so I'm going to stop. That was Dublin. I'm hoping the rest of the year goes a little better. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.